I'd like to get someone to make a motion to adopt the agenda for today's meeting.
Second.
Second. Everyone in favor? Aye. Anyone against? Okay. Before I ask for a motion on the June 20th minutes, I want to point out that there were some edits made to the minutes on pages 1, 2, and 3. The new minutes, and it is highlighted and bolded and italicized. So if you have not gotten a copy of the new minutes, please raise your hand and we'll get you a copy. Anyone? Anyone else? Okay, so bold and italicized, pages 1, 2, and 3. Anyone else needs a copy of the minutes? Okay, is there a motion? Thank you, Board. Let a second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone against? Okay, the ayes have it. We will start with, Madam President, do you want to do?
Let's do the community board
Borough
reports.
Community board reports. Okay, Community Board 1.
Morning.
Good morning.
So a couple of items that I'm sure others may be wrestling with. And one, it's a major category of licensing and permits. We're having several problems with applications for liquor licenses where there's use of a roof tower. And this has become problematic for neighbors. I'm sure we're all wrestling with it, but we're trying to develop some process and maybe some guidelines. So we'll have to hear other ideas. The other thing is that because of the nature of our neighborhood, older buildings, and some new ones, but mostly older buildings, are being purchased and converted into event spaces. Similar to Cipriani, someone is now proposing to buy the old American Stock Exchange. It's a landmark building outside, but inside, they're proposing potentially a space that could accommodate 3,000 people. Now, if you know the geography of Lower Manhattan, our old historic sweep grid simply can't handle that. Plus, we've now transitioned over to a very residential neighborhood. Next, resiliency. We're pleased that we at least have kind of a master plan. We're having quarterly meetings. We had our first one last week. It went well. And we're also working directly with the board SIFT on having kind of an informal partnership about talking about challenges that community boards have in that issue. Last night, we had the chair of LMDC came in and talked about the release of an RFP for the last site at the World Trade Center campus, Site 5, which was the old George Bank building. And it's going to be moving forward, and we're obviously pushing for community spaces and as much affordable housing as possible. And LMDC seems to be amenable to that, but the Port Authority is also involved. And they have a very complex relationship about what could be developed there. Lastly, our perennial developer is Howard Hughes at the Seaport area, and they have two major issues that are going on. One is they have now been accepted into the Brownfields program for the property at 250 Water Street, which has no contamination. But we also have very stringent zoning on that area. And so that will be a major project to look at the development at that. Today, it's a full block parking lot, so it will be very interesting to see how it develops. And then lastly, 4th of July, and things are not always what they seem, but access to the pier and to the rooftop of Pier 17 was cut off because of the fireworks display, and the community was quite outraged about it, rightfully so, because in lieu for that, we are supposed to have unfettered access to at least a portion of the rooftop. But it seems that both NYPD, Homeland Security, and even Macy's themselves took over the whole property. And so it's not clear who did what. And I'm sure everybody would like to blame someone else. I met with Howard Hughes on Tuesday, and we're doing a full kind of review of what happened, how we can prevent this ever from happening again. Thank you.
Thank you. CB2? CB2 going once, twice, CB3? Okay, CB4.
Well, we skipped ahead. CB4, okay, I think I reported last month on proposals at Fulton Houses. We're moving along. Our premium board is moving along. We proposed a pause, capital P. Everybody take a deep breath. Let's all wait a while. Let's all come together in the fall. The word being stakeholders, that's the word, right? The tenants, there are now already, as you can imagine, competing tenant associations. The original, traditional, the independent, the more independent, the extra independent. You never know if they're one person, two people, 200. Tenants Association, Housing Authority. We have worked out, we like to call it another item for their toolbox, transfer of development rights. We've located receiving sites. Most of the receiving sites in our community are way far away from Fulton Houses. They're commercial districts up on 11th Avenue in the 20s. Fulton Houses is 17th Street, 18th Street, 19th Street. There are two sites near Fulton, all the rest are way north. But we say, let's not pose this right now, let's come together and talk. City Council is also working on looking at development rights, looking at receiving spots, and we're all going to get together, hopefully with reasonable respect and conversation, and people will be able to hear each other, because that's been a problem already. People don't hear each other. They talk, I would describe it, in parallel streams. Not with each other, not against each other, just, they have their narrative, and the narratives don't meet, and sometimes you get the sense that they don't really care if it doesn't meet. That's not their objective. Their objective is just to get their perspective out there. We want a solution. That's where we're coming from. Housing says they need $160-some odd million for improvements. I guess the technical term would be that's a soft number. You're not going to go apartment by apartment. They have a number out there, how much it's going to cost for each apartment, and they just multiply by the number of apartments. Is that a real number? Who knows? But we know that in transferring the development rights at a fixed rate, because in terms of development rights, we don't want individual negotiations for each site, for each transfer, because the way we do it in Community Board 4, in the West Chelsea Special District, in the Highline Special District, the development right has a non-negotiable value to it. So if I want to buy it 1 week and then you want to buy it in 3 weeks, we pay the same price. It's in the zoning. It's there. It's not up for grabs, which makes it easier and more predictable, which is what people want, predictability. So, fingers are crossed. Fingers are crossed. Port Authority Bus Terminal began their hearing testimony on the replacement. We did our preliminary testimony in July. We're going to do a final testimony in September. I mentioned the issues last month. We want all those buses off the street. We want air being cleaner. And we want a spot for the island buses that just come in, drop people off, and wait for them to come back. We have 2 other housing issues that we're continually working on. We have these sites that we use for the water tunnel, sites for the MTA. We're looking for housing. We want to look at it in a totality, not this site, not that site. We have the old slaughterhouse site. We're looking at them in totality. We also have an issue on 7th Avenue. We've been negotiating, and every time we think we have an agreement that everybody says yes, 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 and then 2 weeks later, it seems though everybody is not quite together. So we have to have another meeting on that. And then just one item, Anthony, we have been dealing with rooftops for years. I used to be co-chair of the Business License Permits Committee, liquor license. And we have a protocol, so I'll send you the protocol.
Thank you.
We also have, in terms of liquor licenses, sometimes you can put stipulations on, sometimes you negotiate and they agree, not 4 o'clock, 2 o'clock, not 2 o'clock, 12 o'clock. But sometimes you come across an application, and we have one right now before us, that we just say, it's not appropriate. Just not appropriate. And it's on west side of 8th Avenue, which is our side of 8th Avenue, 44th or 45th Street. It had been a video store, a health food store, whatever, small 4-story building. On one side is another high-rise residential, and then a mid-rise residential. It faces in the backyards from the side streets. It's not that they want a bar, they want a dance club. Music, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just not the right place. No matter how they come up with their acoustical plans and how, and they all sound good. Of course, an acoustical plan is only as good as if it's implemented, right? And sometimes, it says, as best as we can. Well, as best as they can may not be best for the neighborhood and the neighbors. So we're saying deny, put down all the reasons. We don't often do that, an outright denial. Our procedure is usually deny unless you meet these stipulations. This one is, we can't put any stipulations. It's just not the right operation for this location. Find someplace else. Maybe go to Community Board 1 in one of those event spaces.
We'll open our own.
Yeah, done. Thank you.
Thanks for sending that.
I will.
Thank you. CB5?
Hi, I'm Craig Slutskin. I'm sitting in for Nikki Barber today. We have a few things in CB5 that I wanted to report on. First, our Public Safety and Quality of Life Committee, which is our liquor license committee. We're currently reviewing a number of liquor license applications within the area of Broadway between 28th and 30th Streets. In a 1-month period, we got 5 applications for different venues. We thought that was a lot, given that we just approved stipulations, a bunch of other ones. Because there are so many new licenses, we're afraid that all these applications can transform the nature of this neighborhood, good or bad. So we've created a task force to analyze the current conditions in the area. So taking a look at what's there now, what's been recently approved, what their capacities are, operations are, so are they dance clubs, or just small bars or restaurants, if there's any outdoor space, such as rooftops or sidewalk cafes. We're gonna identify residential buildings, bike lanes, sidewalk
Richard, there's a space
congestions,
right over there.
just to see what else is in this area. An analysis about how the influx of hotels in this area may be relevant. We just had the Virgin Hotel is coming up, and there's a bunch of other hotels as well, and they also want their rooftops,
They just sit there like.
sidewalk cafes, etc. And then the task force is gonna recommend guidelines for business operations and particular characteristics of the building, operations, size, capacity of the venue.
I would do it.
There's a precedent for this. We did this a number of years ago in the Flatiron area. This is going back 10 years or so. There were a number of problem clubs. Today was a problem club, for example, where there were certainly a lot of issues. And we got together and formed a task force, and then we implemented guidelines, and it's called our restricted licensing area. So we think this will take about 3 months to do, and we're working on it now. The task force consists of both community board members as well as residents in the area. We wanted to make sure that residents were adequately represented. CB5, moving along, CB5 voted to deny a DCP zoning text amendment proposal regarding signage and amenities in POPs, which are privately owned public spaces. CB5 has a number of them. We have 102 POPs in our neighborhood. We think that's the largest in the borough. We denied this because overall we felt the zoning text amendment's goal is positive and would enhance POPs users, but there were a number of issues that we felt were unresolved. So for example, 46 of these POPs in our district were from pre-1975, which have certain as-of rights. We felt that the number, the style, the design of movable furniture with these as-of rights really need to be taken a look at in respecting current design standards, even though they were as-of rights. There has to be signage mandated at each entrance, as well as the locations where people tend to congregate, just to inform people that it is a POP and what the rights are of individual people. There have to be signage requirements between both the POPs operator and us as community board members. We also think that DOB needs to train their inspectors properly, so this way violations that are issued are appropriate. We also want to make sure that enforcement of non-compliant activities is codified and supported, because what we see with a number of places is that the operators sort of privatize these POPs and do whatever they want. They could have sports events, which really don't take it away from being a public space and make it their own. One example is the Aventi Hotel on 6th and I think it's 29th, which is very problematic because they have their own POP area, and they've basically made it into their own space. So we're looking at that, but we voted to deny that proposal. Next up is DOT has a plan for 42nd Street. They're proposing to reconfigure traffic lanes across the length of 42nd Street with new characteristics, which are going to be unique to each block on 42nd Street. So they're proposing hours and curb regulations, including offsetting of bus lanes, curbside bus lanes, metered commercial and truck loading to encourage deliveries to take place later on, not during the day. There are also plans to consolidate some bus stops and new turning restrictions. So the goal, which is obviously a good goal, to improve speeds and congestions on the thoroughway with the installation beginning this summer. So CB5 supported the majority of this plan because of its long-term consideration of improvements within the wider Times Square district. It's taking a look holistically at resolving long-standing congestion on 42nd between 7th and 8th. We did ask DOT to consider and include mitigation within the plan for some construction that's planned for between Vanderbilt and Lexington in the context of the Grand Hyatt hotel redevelopment. And we did ask for, we do hope that DOT can provide our ongoing request for a comprehensive street plan for Midtown Manhattan. But overall, we felt that this was a good plan and we were supportive. CB5 also supported the passage of Councilmember Rivera and Power's recent bills on rental housing costs. This was actually a very lively discussion at the board. We think that the bills the goal of the bills are very good. We think that there are some steps that need to be taken to go past that, but overall we thought the bills worked well. We do believe that the enforcement of the proposed rental fee limitation is not adequately considered in the bill. We think that the proposed bills don't increase affordable housing stock in New York, and there may be some difficulty in the implementation of the 14-day return of security deposits, given the need to wait for final utility payments, which are usually sometimes taken out of those security deposits. But in spite of these concerns, these bills are definitely a step in the right direction for decreasing costs for all of New Yorkers' housing. And it'll particularly help New Yorkers who are less financially stable to secure livable housing. Finally, one of our favorite topics, legalization of e-bikes and scooters. CB5 opposed the legalization of e-scooters and e-bikes in Manhattan until the City Council can prevail upon the state to require DMV to license and register electronic vehicles and their operators, assign speed limits, establish assigned lanes so that no electric or motorized vehicle can operate on sidewalks, clear operational regulations for each vehicle class, and provide enforcement for these rules and regulations. We supported the decision of the state legislature, to ban e-scooter share programs in the Borough of Manhattan. We've urged the NYPD to improve enforcements through the creation of a two-wheel enforcement unit to oversee regulation of all two-wheeled and other alternative vehicles, collect fines, issue tickets, establish rules, run a bicycle patrol force geared to the particular nature and safety policing such vehicles. We also did support the creation of the financial assistance to aid low-income workers in the conversion of their illegal throttle-powered devices to approved pedal assist bikes with government-regulated speeds, of course, as well as legislation mandating an increased living wage for delivery workers in action to make business owners or third-party delivery companies the liable party for enforcement, not the actual delivery persons themselves. We also called for any legislation considered by the council on the legalization of e-scooters, e-bikes, and share programs to be decoupled. They shouldn't be one big package. They should be separated by device class and their individual program. And that's my report for CB5.
Thank you so much. CB6.
Great. I'm Asya Badi. I'm subbing for Molly today. She had a few quick updates. We had a really successful senior resource fair at the end of June, which was really popular and well attended. Two of our refurbished waterfront parks have opened this month, Glick Park and Sutton Place Parks, with new electrical, lighting, and water, which is very exciting. We'll have ribbon cutting soon. And our communications working group is working with digital natives to launch an updated website in October. So, and that's it.
CB7.
So, a couple of things. We have a special zoning district, the Lincoln Square zoning district, and years ago when it was created, they carved out the ABC studios, which are on 66th to 67th Street, Columbus Avenue, heading east towards the park. And a while ago, ABC sold all their studios to Silverstein, and they're probably going to be there for 5 or 6 years. Landmarks West went to the city planning to see if the carve-out could be taken, if the carved-out area could be put back into the Lincoln Square Special Zoning District, and they said they thought it was a great idea, but we'd have to do it, and we've estimated it at, over 6 figures. So we're hoping that maybe we could get a meeting with city planning and maybe with Gail's office to see if we could somehow get city planning to work on it rather than to have to, either that or to find out if there are grants if there's some grant programs available that would pay for this, since of course community boards don't have that kind of resource. The CPW, the Central Park West Bike Lane, we asked DOT to come in with a plan for a protected bike lane, which they did, which was approved at the full board meeting, but it means removing 400 parking spaces, which would be parallel to what's on Fifth Avenue, where there are no parking spaces alongside the park. It was a controversial meeting. People were angry, but they acted very respectfully. The following week, we had a meeting with about a loading zone on West 61st Street, across from where the Parks Department has their building. And we had so many angry people that when I asked them to leave the room, because that part of the meeting was over, they refused to leave, they refused to be quiet. Meantime, Deputy Inspector Mallon from the 2O was there in civilian clothes, but his executive officer was there in a uniform. And they got up and they announced that these people needed to leave the room. People said they weren't gonna leave the room. So he told Alexandra to call the 2-4 to send some cops over to remove the people. This one woman looked at him and said, "On what grounds can you have me removed?" And so he sat there, and I just stood there actually, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And I'm like, if you want your lawyer, this is what you're gonna tell him you're gonna be arrested on. And suddenly, they left. So I was pleased, I didn't have to call the 2-4 to get them to leave. So my advice, if you're gonna have a contentious meeting, invite your local police. We're gonna have a transportation forum in the fall. We're looking at, because of the congestion pricing coming, and we hope, of course, that Mark Levine will be involved with this, to have the use of curbside space, whether it be for residential parking or street seats or whatever, just sort of have a general discussion. We're trying to get some people from NYU and from a couple of other places to come in and just have it, more educational than discussion. George James has done a fabulous study for us on how the effects of daylight. I will share it with everybody. We looked at it Tuesday night, and we've suggested some tweaks to him to just make it a little easier to understand. And we're also looking at some of the NYCHA. There's a lot of problems with NYCHA. Weiss Towers is now going into the RAD program, and we have concerns about both Amsterdam Houses and Frederick Douglass. So we may do a study involving residents from both those areas.
Okay, CBA?
Thank you. So last night we had our full board meeting, and at the public's opportunity to speak, every single person raised the problems with 311, and then various board members did as well. So I don't know if any of the people here have had issues with 311, either being non-responsive, a black hole sucking up information, not sending them to the right people. So I just wanted to raise that as an issue. Lenox Hill Hospital has these enormous expansion plans, which is a very big issue potentially for us. It's on Park Avenue, so Park Avenue can afford it and have mobilized and have hired a lawyer. But we're really concerned that they want to put up a 50-story hospital on Lexington, which is zoned for 170 feet, and a 40-story condo on Park Avenue to fund the expansion of the hospital, because since Northwell acquired them, they seem to want to compete with all of the hospitals along the river. So, and they are doing, I think they're trying to do an end run around the community board. They've been approaching community groups and not really engaging with us except to ask if we want to be part of their working group, but I turned that opportunity down to be complicit. I felt it was too complicit, but we're having a community meeting on the second Wednesday in September to engage the community's responses to and concerns about the growth of the hospital. It's a really big issue, and they're supposed to come to the zoning meeting at the end of September. They just have, their lobbying group is Casira, and they're very, this is aggressive, but there's also, and it feels like there's this overriding thing going on around the city, like the church on 110th Street, Lenox Hill Hospital, other not-for-profits that think they could do whatever they want because their function is in the public good. So when mandatory inclusionary housing or something was suggested for this condo on Park Avenue, they said, oh, we don't have to do anything because this is all in the public good. And that's a really big concern, is the nature of the not-for-profits just having maybe exponential growth and not having to account for anything. For the Holmes Tower, is there any kind of update, Rosie, that you know of on anything legal with that?
I don't think there's anything new at this moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I can give you just a sentence or two. The issues now have coalesced around whether our action is ripe or not. And the administration and NYCHA are claiming that it's not ripe. It's a little interesting because NYCHA's papers actually said, well, either this is not ripe for litigation or they're too late. It's like they're playing this like, you'll never guess when we've actually taken the actions, you know. So we will be hashing that out in court probably in mid to late September.
Okay, so that's a big concern, and the administration apparently went from 50-50 market rate and affordable to 70% market rate on the same property with the same developer. So that's a real problem for us. E-scooters, we're also opposed to e-scooters. Third-party delivery companies and e-bikes, they seem to be untouchable, and I don't really understand that. We have stipulations with the bars and the restaurants that they're not supposed to use e-bikes, although they use them anyway, but then they contract with these third-party companies and then say, well, there's not much we can do, this is what they do. So I think that's an issue, and congestion pricing, that there is no one from Manhattan on the congestion pricing panel in Albany is really disconcerting. It is unbelievable, and especially for 7 and 8 that are on the boundaries of this, it's really a potential problem, and we just don't know. So anyway, so those are some citywide and some community issues. Thank you.
Thank you. CB9? CB9, okay, CB10.
Good morning. Marquise Harrison, the first Vice Chair of Community Board 10, sitting in for Cicely Harris. Just a couple of things that we've had in the last month, or since Cicely's been before this body. We had an incident at Alibi Lounge, which the community's rallied around, LGBTQ bar, and it's caused the board to also take a look at this, and we are preparing to start and launch our LGBTQ task force that we had before, but kind of dwindled, and we are working together now. There are a lot of board members who have interest and community members who want to be a part of this coalition, and so we want to make sure that going forth, we kind of do whatever we can to let the community know that there's lots of support, and as well as that that hate won't be tolerated in our board. We recently hired, as just 2 days ago, hired a community coordinator for our board. This has been an effort that we've been undertaken for a long time. And we are preparing for Harlem Week. Today, there'll be with the Harlem Chamber of Commerce. There are a lot of activities that will be taking place in the board. So I encourage anyone to look on, the calendar's online. But that's all I have for today.
Thank you. CB11.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I want to concur with my colleague from Community Board 10. I had the great honor of being at that press conference. It is important that not only the upper community boards support when we have an event like this happen in any one of our districts, but that we all come out in force. We all have gay members in our community, and it's important that we take a stand wherever possible and be visible, because in unity there's power and numbers. And so thank you so much for extending, Community Board 10 extending me an invitation to be there as well. So in terms of Community Board 11, we had our meeting 2 days ago. We hired a new assistant district manager and a community associate. We had our district manager working by himself for the last several weeks, and so we're happy that we are having staff coming on board. In August, we had a successful small business fair at the Neighborhood Action Center in June. It was very well attended, and there was a lot of community groups there, so that was a real success for our economic development committee. We currently are planning an LGBTQ conference in September. We pushed it back from Pride Month for the simple reason that there's so many events going on in June that people just seem to just think about, you know, Pride in June, and Pride is every day, every month, and so we went a little bit outside the box, changed our date for September. We're doing that with the Neighborhood Action Center. In terms of CB work, we actually voted to approve letters condemning the ICE raids that have happened within our community and the stand that the Trump administration has taken against immigrants and people of color. So that was voted on. We also voted on a letter of support for the family of Eric Gardner, considering the recent decisions that have been made and the lack of action that has been taken. We felt that that was timely to do that as well. We are still meeting for a consolidated garage in Community Board 11 that would house potentially Community Board 10's garage. 11, as we have, we're great partners, it seems, with CB 10. We also participated in the Stop the Violence Youth March. It's important that we do that not only once a year, but that we constantly keep that narrative going. Children's Aid Society is moving forward with their redevelopment of their site and falling in line with the developers. So hopefully they'll get as much or more land than they had floor area space for their programs. And one of the last things I want to mention is that the J. Marion Sims replacement statue is moving ahead. And so there was meetings held yesterday, and there will be community input in August, and then potentially the selection of an artist at the end of August. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. CB 12.
CB12 is on summer recess, but that doesn't mean that we're not active, and that doesn't mean the community is not doing a lot of other things. And so, just to brief you on a few of those things, we are actually in the final phase of the construction of our live streaming tech area and language translation area in our conference room. And when that's finished, we will let you know about it. We were happy to hear the announcement from the Department of DHS changing their position on having 175 men shelter coming to our community, and instead converting that into 175 women and children. We don't have the details of yet, but it does show that if we do ask, the government does seem to respond, at least for our causes, and so we're somewhat, and the community is somewhat happy about that. We really are happy about the support that we had from the electeds, and it did help us as well. Another important thing that we've had a long time asking for improvements in one of our parks in High Ridge, the lower region, the Adventures Park, and finally with the mayor's initiative on several parks with $30 million that was granted for High Ridge Park, that initiative is taking place, and Gail was there along with other electeds with the commissioner on the start of the construction of that particular area on Saturday. Finally, we have had a meeting yesterday with several electeds and the MTA and the New York City Transit on the elevator rehab, the next phase which will begin in August for the 181st Street elevators and the 190th Street elevators. They're deep elevators off of a cliff. One goes to Overlook Terrace, which is also very hilly, and one goes to Bennett Avenue. So the only way of getting out of these will be extreme, and so we had a meeting to discuss our demand for shuttle buses, and subsequently we'll have a meeting next week to see what that decision is, and we'll meet with the public so that hopefully they will listen to our pleas that a lot of seniors, a lot of senior services, a lot of place-based institutions, and so they are going to be more than convenient. They just can't navigate in that area since the construction is going to take a year each way. So hopefully we can get a good and favorable response to that. I believe that's all I have for the moment. Again, we are happy that we're able to communicate with our electeds, they're communicating with different agencies, and we seem to get more positive responses.
Okay, Thank you very much. So, we're gonna move now into the discussion about the ULURP matter, the East Side Coastal Resiliency. And, Jim, do you wanna start that discussion?
Sure. So if any of you, I don't know if any of you have a draft of the resolution in front of you. If you don't, unless I gave it to you, this is the one that you want to be looking at. If you can take one and pass it down.
Write final on it, because it's not clear that there's a difference. Just write on it, final something.
So I want to thank Stephanie Chan of our office. I also want to thank Councilmember Rivera's, Powers, and Chin's offices. We've been going back and forth on language. Just to point out the difference between the draft sent around yesterday, and then we'll move to the, Gail is going to ask some questions of the administration, and they're going to do a brief presentation. If you see page 6, the highlighted language, that's been sort of moved up and emphasized in this draft. So if you all may want to take a look at that. And Gail, why don't you take it?
Okay, so I appreciate all the work that has gone into this. This is an immense billion-dollar project. I think those who are part of the community know how big it is and how challenging it is. I do want to thank the city because they have been briefing us. We had a hearing last night with 100 and almost 250 people signing in and 56 people testifying. So there are a lot of people who are interested, and I know that the community boards who are not here, 3 and 6 in terms of chairs are not here. So Jim will talk later about how we're going to handle that particular situation. So I'm one of these people, I do always question. For those of you who know me know that. So I have a lot of questions that I hope that when the people from DDC and Parks present quickly that they try to answer. One is the phasing. I know this has come up a lot. I know the council member has brought it up. We want to figure out a way that the parks do not become completely unusable for the entire 3 years or whatever the time period is. That is huge. Now, I understand there's a sewer line, and how do you make sure that you do phasing when you have a sewer line, which obviously cannot be phased? So that is a question. The issue too is can a phasing plan be created that spends the federal money in time? That might be an easier question to answer than the sewer, but the sewer is a big one. Number 2, we want to know, how sure are we of the timeline? We all know that the work will start before permits and approvals are obtained, if that's true. How long will the fill take to settle? There's a lot of question. If you are bringing in barges of fill, it needs to settle before you can move forward. How do we know this? Who has been giving us that information? And what is the status with the fill? We want to know, there's a lot of interest in having, this came up last night, constantly an independent review so that the information that we're getting from the city of New York can be verified. So we want to know how and why city isn't confident that that's a good idea. The community feels it is a good idea. So why isn't it a good idea? That would be the question for the city. There's a lot of confusion, although those of you who have not been involved may not be confused, but those of us who are, alternative 3 versus alternative 4, we won't even talk about alternative 1 or 2. But 3 and 4, what about when you're raising the park 8 feet approximately, how does that influence flood walls, and how does that change the impact on views, if at all? You're lining up NYCHA buildings. Will their view be impacted? A lot of questions about the bike lanes. There are bike lanes there now. People bicycle. What would be the impact of the bike lanes? People feel very negatively will be the impact. The noise factor, you've got 3 years of noise. What will that be specifically? And there's a hope from the city's perspective that a lot of this work is being done at night. People feel that that is to benefit the cars on the FDR and not the people in the neighborhoods. When I hear 1,000 new trees, is that in the park, or are those street trees in addition? I understand it's in addition, but I want to be clear. And then CB6, I know there was a question about what was the tone when you had your meeting about alternative
Three.
number 3, right? Those are the questions. I mean, there are so many more. I'm very concerned, and we all are, about the ecology center. There's a firehouse there. It does work like none other in terms of citywide support for everything environmental. That's making a very short version of the great work they do. Right now, a new firehouse, for lack of a better word, or a new space for the ecology center is not paid for in the budget. It must be paid for in the budget, whether it's public, private, or any other kind of support. That must be part of the plan, at least in my perspective. I have one other question here. I mean, there were many, many issues that came up. Why boys in one place on that, the upward noise. Insects. I remember years ago, I was with Dominic Recchia, who was a member of the city council with some of us. And we were on the west side, and people brought up birds flying into buildings. He said, "Am I on Mars?" I said, "No, you're on the upper west side of Manhattan." Literally, those were his exact words. Well, insects. It was brought up last night. I know nothing about habitat in terms of species and insects, but that is an issue. Came up last night. Will they be disturbed to the point that is a challenge? So those are some of the issues that I brought out of last night. The sculptures, yes, there is actually a neighbor of mine, God help us, another Upper West Sider, who has built the sculptures in the park, who has about, I don't know how many animals that are beloved, and that is not clear as to what he asked last night, he showed up, he wants to know what's gonna happen to his sculptures. That's another topic. These are small but big for those who are concerned. So are there anything else?
No,
Okay.
so let's have DDC and Park.
Yes, Jamie and anybody else here?
Thank you very much. I can just stand.
Jamie Torres Springer has been a yo person on this topic, but he's got many more to go.
A yo person?
Yo person, that's a positive thing.
Okay.
That's positive in mine, because it's not like you're
Just checking.
extraordinary, it's just that you're doing well, and you
Oh,
have
I
many
see.
more
All right.
meetings to
Well,
go.
yes. Uh-huh.
Yes.
We're up for the challenge. So I'm the first deputy commissioner at the Department of Design and Construction. I know many of you and have the privilege of working with many of you. I'm sure even more of you know and work with Deputy Commissioner Alyssa Cobb-Conan from the Parks Department. We have a sort of a, there you go. For her, yes, for her we apply. I know you want to keep this brief, so this is a presentation that often takes us 45 minutes to present with the two of us. So, and we're going to try to keep it in 10 minutes, and I think the strategy we came up with is that maybe I'll just run through everything and Alyssa will just supplement in this case. But please know that Parks is extremely engaged, to say the least. So we'll just give you the overview of the project. So just putting this in borough-wide context, as I think is appropriate. We had Sandy, certainly revealed significant flood risk from events like Sandy, the major coastal storm surge that will inundate portions of Manhattan, and then also, I think, woke everybody up, and we got the New York City Panel on Climate Change and the projections that have been led through the mayor's office of both what that event looks like in the long term in the future, but also these other events, tidal inundation, which will happen as the sea levels rise from the East River and the Hudson River. We're likely to see sort of, lower scale monthly, daily tidal inundation of portions of the coastal edge. And then we have events like, we didn't have a lot of rain during Sandy, but if you look at Harvey in Houston last year, or actually New Orleans last week, heavy rainfall, and that's a whole other sort of climate hazard that has to be addressed through our infrastructure. So, some period after Sandy, there was a lot of thinking about something, at one point it was called the Big U, through the Rebuild by Design competition. How do we protect this coastal edge from a range of threats, but do it in such a way that we're actually improving the edge, improving open space, improving access to the waterfront, and so on. And we have different conditions in different parts of the island and the edges that your community boards represent. We have the lowest lying land edge is on the East River. That reflects a historic condition, where the settlement of the east side of the island happened earlier. The bulkhead was built up at a certain level where actually a lot of shipping was still occurring. So we have a low edge in that context. When you come around to the west side, Battery Park City is the other end of the spectrum, built only 30, 40 years ago, and the whole land area, not just the edge, but the land is at a much higher elevation, and it means that it didn't flood during Sandy, and there's some tweaks that need to be made over time, but it's the most resilient area. So we're very focused on this east side along the East River and its vulnerabilities. And the goal of the project, as developed, has been to provide a reliable integrated flood protection system. And again, I just emphasize the other part of this sentence here, which is there are two ways of addressing coastal flooding. One is the best way, passive, meaning the land or whatever is there is high and you don't have to do anything. It's just able to defend the neighborhood against the water that's coming. The other way is you use gates and other closure structures. Those are operable. They're subject to human failure. They're subject to inoperability. They're complex. If you don't have the meteorology right, you may not have enough time. So there's more risk associated. So the more we can get passive structures versus active structures, the better off we are in terms of long-term protection. Is that me? And then, as I said, the other goal, do it in a way that improves waterfront open space and access. The project received $338 million in federal funding from HUD through this Rebuild by Design competition. That was nowhere near sufficient to fund the project. The mayor and council have now passed 10-year capital plan and capital budget that fully funds the project, $1.45 billion. So there's more than an additional $1 billion in city funding in the project. And then do it quickly. Respond to that urgent need for flood protection, and that's something that is very important. So obviously, I think everyone's aware of the impacts of Sandy that we're trying to address. How does the project do that? Well, this is our current condition. We have projected into the future what the 100-year storm like Sandy will be like with sea level rise. We've done it to the 2050s. We have projections later, and I'll talk about that in a second. But looking at that projection, water comes over East River Park in this area and floods the neighborhood. We mostly have NYCHA property. We have about 15,000 NYCHA residents in this district who are getting flooded, and the water just comes in. The proposal, the preferred alternative, which is alternative 4, is to raise East River Park by about 8 feet on average, putting the flood protection underneath it. No one will know that the flood protection is there. It's a structural flood wall, but it's buried underneath the park as we reconstruct it. And that allows us to have that passive protection. So in East River Park, we're able to raise the park, create the passive protection. We don't rely on floodgates in that area. And also the additional benefit of that is improving open space. We're rebuilding all of East River Park. And as I'll show in a second, we're doing some other things as well. This is the plan sort of in axon view. So raising East River Park by 8 feet through a reconstruction with the bulkhead and flood wall. And then where we don't have that sufficient area to be able to raise the edge, we do have flood wall and gates in what we call Project Area 2, which is really Community Board 6's district. We're building a flood protection structure and then a number of gates. I think there are about 18 gates in total in the project. And those will have to be operated. They'll be operated by DOT. There will be a protocol for that. And reconstructing all of the open spaces that are in this project area. We're also improving waterfront access, replacing 3 of the pedestrian bridges, preserving the others, improving the Houston Street Bridge landing. And the administration has also funded this flyover bridge at this pinch point on the east side adjacent to the Con Ed generating station. So I think we have $53 million in the budget, $56 million in the budget for that to create a flyover bridge over that area.
That's in addition to the 1.5, or that is in the 1.5?
It's in addition.
In
Yeah,
addition.
it's in DOT's budget. Okay. Also, very importantly, as you mentioned, Borough President, improving drainage. So again, it's not just about coastal storm surge. You have to make sure that if you're closing off the edge, that if you have a heavy rainfall, we can't have a bowl effect or a bathtub effect where all the water is just sitting there. So we're adding this parallel conveyance for stormwater to basically bulk up the capacity of the sewer system to be able to address those issues. And then secondly, we need to basically cut off, I mean, hopefully over time, as someone mentioned earlier, the city has an overall master plan for addressing the edge from one end to the other. We have to deliver a project that has what's called independent utility for HUD. Otherwise, we can't get access to federal funding. To do that, we have to prove that we're able to basically waterproof this area or this compartment. And one of the ways of doing that is we have interceptor gates that will close in a storm condition, which makes sure that water, if there's flooding to the south or flooding to the north, water doesn't get into this area. That's basically the description of the project. We're on a schedule in ULURP. We had the borough president hearing last night, as was mentioned. The goal is to get to an approval in the fall to finalize design, do our construction procurement, enter construction in March of next year, and have a flood protection that's operational before hurricane season of 2023. So we're really rushing to do that. The whole project is scheduled for completion by the end of 2023. I'm just trying to sort of weave in answers to some of the questions that you raised as we go. So we cannot start the project until we have all permits and approvals. So we need to be through ULURP, and then because we have federal funds, we need something called an authorization for use of grant funds. And we have to complete any acquisitions, and at that point, we're able to start construction. So the earliest we can do that is next March. We are taking very seriously the compelling need to create flood protection for this community as soon as possible. That's the priority. Because of that, we did make the decision that we would need to close East River Park at the moment, for the duration of construction, which is a 3.5-year period. We looked very carefully at that, took it very seriously, obviously. Basically, I think actually hearing the community board reports is sort of this reflected to me. Construction is difficult in Manhattan because we don't have places to stage. And so a job like this, which is an immensely complicated construction job, has to be staged. And the only place we can stage it is in East River Park. We need to use barging for materials. We need a temporary concrete batching plant that we'll create on site. We need to have laydown areas. We need to do that. We came to the preliminary conclusion that we could not stage the project, whatever project it was, the old approach, the new approach, without having East River Park to stage within. Then we looked at, well, what about one portion of East River Park or another? And that's very complicated because access basically comes for trucks from Montgomery Street in the south. That's the only access point for trucks. So any work that we're doing, the trucks have to be coming in from the south and going to wherever they're going within the park. And the conclusion we came is that we could not ensure the safety of people who would be using the park if we had that level of construction activity. Now, we've obviously been pressed very hard, and appropriately so, to figure out if there's a way to phase, and we're working very hard on that. We're finalizing design at the moment and bringing on board our construction manager. So working through those issues to figure out two things. One, can we finish portions early so that they can be reopened? And two, are there any portions that can be left open and we can stage around? And we're working on that, and we certainly will have answers to that question in the fall before ULURP concludes. I did end up talking for too long, so, but we've tried to do an enormous amount of community engagement. I think we have admitted, and my Commissioner Lorraine Grillo came forward with Commissioner Silver at a council hearing called by the council members a few months back, and acknowledged and apologized that when we made a change to the approach, that we did not adequately incorporate community engagement. People are upset about that. We understand. There are a range of conditions that we can use to explain that. But you know, that's what happened. We've done, since then, we've had 57 community meetings in a variety of different contexts, and hopefully been able to incorporate a lot of feedback and provide a lot of information to people. It's just a sampling of some of the meetings. I don't think we'll spend a lot of time on this, other than to say we're happy to answer questions, and usually Alyssa, as I say, does this part in a lot more detail. But just to say that the project allows us to rebuild East River Park, which is a park built, it's beloved in many ways, but inadequate in many other ways to meet the community's needs. It's a park that was built by Robert Moses 80 or 90 years ago. We have been, what we heard from the community was put all of the active recreation back. People love it and they want to use it, so we are. Every active recreation component is being rebuilt in a modern, much more adequate way. The other thing we heard is people want more passive recreation, places for families to gather and use the park. We've incorporated a lot more passive recreation. That includes barbecue pits. It includes a lot of the things that we heard about. So we're able to rebuild the park. I should also mention that in the alternative 3, the previous approach, we also were rebuilding the entire park. It's just that I'm not sure that that ever sort of registered with people that we needed to do that. So there's a walkthrough that we can do in more detail showing this is one of the areas where you do have the flood wall with the gate that would close in a storm condition. We're incorporating that into the project as needed. We have a number of different elements, including reconstructing the amphitheater in the southern portion of the park. Fireboat House is the home of the Lower East Side Ecology Center. We've been engaging with the Ecology Center. The borough president was asking about this. We're in the process right now of looking at a few things. One, what could we do to the Fireboat House to make it sustainable in the long term? It cannot be raised, so we've left it in its current location, and there would be a way to get down to it. That will be adequate for a period of time, but really it's going to erode structurally and not be sustainable. So we're looking at what could we do to flood-proof it or protect it, and then we're also doing some work on, is there another opportunity to create a different home for them within the park? We've also looked at their compost, the area that they use for compost presently. We're now incorporating that into the park, raising the grade so that it will be integrated. Working with the Ecology Center, a number of different access points that will be vastly improved into the park, really providing much more of a community resource to meet the needs of all different folks from the community, in a much more advanced way. And then we also, I just want to mention, are incorporating get downs and embayments, because people say, well, you're raising the park, how do you, what about the access to the water? Well, that's really all about how you deal with the edge. So we have these embayments that get incorporated with riprap. You can see those in different parks across the city. Brooklyn Bridge Park has a great sort of get down with riprap slope where people can access the water, and we expect that. In fact, we have embayments in East River Park now, but then they're cut off by a bridge in front of them. So this is actually providing access to the water. And the northern section of the park, all new park facilities will be constructed. Again, pedestrian access. The flyover bridge, which isn't designed yet, but you can see this sort of representation of it. And then in Community Board 6 and Councilmember Powers District, again, a flood wall that runs through the FDR and at the edge of the playground, Stuyvesant Cove Park, Murphy Brothers and Astor Levy, but also allowing us to reconstruct those spaces and create an improved condition. We'll be continuing to operate both the Corlears Hook Ferry and the Stuyvesant Cove Ferry throughout construction. We're accommodating those ferry stops and also looking at whether there's ways we can bulk up ferry for those who need it. So I'm not going to dwell on that. And then we do have a EIS that's conducted under federal, state, and city statutes and is under review. Since you asked, so it looks at this preferred alternative 4, which I've been describing. There was a prior approach that was under consideration. That's really alternative 3. The idea is basically you can do nothing. You can build a wall between the community and East River Park in its present condition. You can build the wall, but then berm the park up to the wall so that it doesn't, on the park side, it doesn't seem like so much of a wall. But on the community side, it would seem very much like a wall. Or you can raise the park. So in the way Commissioner Silver always describes it is we had a plan that was sort of like had East River Park like this before with a wall here and then coming down to the water, but reconstructed. We're tipping the park up like this so that you have access to the park and access to the water. That's really the way the alternatives are being formulated. The actions are actually relatively minimal. There's some acquisition of property, not to build anything on, but just we have to be able to show the federal government that we have access to what we build to be able to maintain it and operate it. So they're relatively small acquisitions and a technical zoning text amendment for Stuyvesant Cove Park. We've certainly looked at impacts in the EIS. Just to, well, I should mention, so the Borough President asked about views. There's a relatively small number of views when you're standing at the edge of East River Park that currently you can probably see water, but it's really, you'll be seeing park. To my knowledge, there's no location within a NYCHA property, anywhere else where you're changing the, where there's view of the water and there wouldn't be a view anymore. We do have construction impacts. Obviously, the closure of the park is a very significant impact, and so that's the open space impacts. I'll come back to that. Transportation impacts we're able to address fully. We do have the greenway that will be closed for the duration of construction. DOT is working on alternatives for that. We know we have protected bike lanes on 1st and 2nd Avenue, and then we're working with the council member in the Lower East Side to look at whether there are ways of creating additional bike lanes, Avenue B and Avenue C. The issue is the impact on a lot of parking spaces, so that's a hard problem that DOT is working through with the council member and her office. In terms of open space, and again, Alyssa can give the long version of this, but just to summarize, Parks has been working very hard on a number of different improvements. One major approach is improving spaces within the community, which means sport coating that allows for active recreation to be used, converting asphalt areas to turf, and then adding and supplementing components to different parks and open spaces in the community so that they're usable for play. And then we're looking at more programming and new park spaces. So existing park spaces that we're looking into, like DOE-controlled spaces, space on Governor's Island where we would be able to accommodate field users. Randall's Island is another example. Completing Pier 42 and Pier 35. Parks is looking at the rebuilding of the LaGuardia Bathhouse as a recreational space, and then a lot more programming that they're supplementing within their budget to be able to accommodate it. And then lastly, we're in ULURP. We've sort of taken seriously requests to provide as much opportunity for public input as possible. Input has been, as I said, we've had a lot of meetings. We've been certainly accepting comments for 3 months now, and there'll be 5 months of total comment period. We've extended by 2 weeks to allow for additional. If we were to extend for any more, we wouldn't have the opportunity to respond to those comments and publish them in the FEIS before the City Planning Commission vote in September. So this was what we were able to accommodate within the statutory ULURP schedule. Places to get
People last night, they want to be able to barbecue everywhere and not be in your sterile barbecue places.
Alyssa.
Can you talk about the trees?
Parks rules.
The trees, yeah, there's 1,000
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the trees, yeah.
Is that parks or you?
Most of your questions are now gonna be for
Okay.
Alyssa.
So on trees first, so as part of the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project, for the project itself, DVC and Parks will be planting 1,442, I believe is the count, trees. In the DEIS, that's what's
But that's in the
disclosed.
park or outside the park?
In the parks, right, there's
Okay.
multiple parks affected here.
No, I understand that.
And then in addition, there may be some street trees in there, I think
Because
there
I
may
was
be a
under,
few.
you had trees
Yeah.
in the park or the renovated park, plus more trees
Right.
in
Yep,
the
and then
community.
and then in addition to that, in response to people saying, don't just do that at the end of your construction project, can you also look at doing some early tree plantings that happen now?
In the
In the
community.
community, we thought that was a great idea, and so we're doing 1,000 new trees in addition to the 1,442
Okay.
trees in the community.
And when do you think they might be planted?
And so we're intending to do an early planting starting this fall, and then we'll have multiple plantings after that, and we'd like to do them as community tree planting events.
Because then we need to make sure that people take care of them, because these are all replacements in many cases.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard that.
Lower East Side Ecology has an excellent tree stewardship program, so
Okay.
we're gonna make sure that we support them with that. So there'll be more trees in the community, and at the end of the project, the final product, there will be more trees than are originally planted right now, correct?
Substantially more,
Yeah.
substantially more,
And
almost 50% more.
And just in terms of the trees in East River Park today, so this is a park that, as Jamie mentioned, was built in 1939. We have some beautiful big trees. However, they are essentially a monoculture. It was more than 50% of the trees in East River Park are of two species. And unfortunately, one of the major ones there is the London plane tree, which is not a salt-tolerant tree, and we've already seen that. That's our experience in reality. After Sandy, not so much in felling the trees during the storm, but afterwards, the salt inundation that we're seeing in East River Park today, so we're already seeing the impacts of climate change in East River Park. We lost 260 trees in East River Park that we had to remove because they died from the salt inundation. And so we do see this as sort of like the beginning of climate change and what we're seeing in the parks. And so the new plantings that we'll be doing are gonna be salt tolerant and more native species.
Yes, I have to leave in a second, but I just wanted to say, and I think we're gonna come back to this for an actual vote next week, but, obviously a very difficult plan with a lot of pieces and a lot of complication, and certainly south of my district and Councilmember Barrett's district, a lot of, still issues that arise around the closure of the park. And I know that both the borough president and the council have been working with, and other colleagues to try to resolve and address some of the loss of public space, but so as on a whole, the plan is necessary. It's, even as we think about all the various components of it, this is really about protecting our communities from future flooding. And I think both, I know Councilmember Bear, myself, Councilmember Chino remember, and Borough President remembers what it was like in those days after Hurricane Sandy. It was weeks and years even after to try to rebuild, get power restored, fix damage, and try to restore our neighborhoods back to where they were. So I think agencies, have been doing their jobs to try to help us, try to address the issues and the very complicated nature of this. But as we deliberate on this in the near future, I think just to recall the importance of doing what we're doing in light of climate change globally, but also locally, the need to protect ourselves for what lies ahead. And I just want to thank the colleagues here at the community boards as well for spending a lot of time, the agencies spending a lot of time to try to make sure that those areas that are affected, those people that are affected, get their issues addressed, and to even go to fix other issues that are even in the nearby area that there's an opportunity to address. I just, as we deliberate on this, I don't want us to forget the real importance of the big ticket item here, which is to prevent flooding and to protect our communities that we all live in from a potentially weather event that could happen in the future. So I want to thank them, and I'm sorry I have to leave you guys.
Yeah, so just to interrupt, we want to thank the council members for coming. We are going to recess this hearing and vote on Tuesday, which is stated meeting day. We'll be in touch with the council members, and because community boards 3 and 6, the chairs weren't able to come today. I think one of the chairs at least was away, and under the charter, you need, for the community board, it has to be the chair. And we've never really had a borough board vote where none of the community board chairs were present. So we are going to recess this meeting and vote, but thank you to all the council members
Jim,
for
I
coming
could just
today.
add, it'll be at 4 p.m. so that both chairs can be there, so it'll be
Well,
after.
we want to discuss with the council members first to
Yes.
make sure that fits
Okay.
with their schedule. So we will get you a time by, tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
And we will, make every effort to notice it. It'll be on our website. We're announcing it here that this hearing will be recessed until Tuesday, but as the council members are aware, sort of during budget time, you've recessed the hearing so you can call it back and we will let you all know hopefully by tomorrow afternoon. So thanks.
All right, so now keep going, do you want?
Okay, different.
A barbecue.
Yes.
So barbecue, definitely something we've heard a lot about. We are both replacing the barbecue at the northern part of the park and then adding a barbecue area in the southern part of the park. We're also looking at both improving some of the barbecue pits that we currently have, as well as putting in new barbecue pits in existing parks for the construction period, but obviously they'd stay there beyond that as well.
The other question I had was the ball fields. I know you've addressed them, but specifics of what people were looking for last night. How are we going to get specifics?
Yes, so multi-pronged answer on the ball fields and the soccer. We have a list of all the permittees. We've reached out to every single one of them to talk to them about what their needs will be as a sort of like how the process works. People put in their applications in December, and that's when we actually assign them. But in the meantime, we have continued to talk to them about where they might go. I know Jamie brushed on it briefly, but what we're focused on is making sure that we can place the local youth leagues locally, which is why we're doing a lot of those interim recreational measures that actually will be more than interim, but measures, which is including, I think it's 7 new turf improvements or fields, putting in solar lighting so we extend playtime for the fields that are in the Lower East Side, increasing staffing, and a variety of other things. I don't have my list in front of me, but to make sure that we can meet that need locally.
Are there other questions? What about my insects?
I think we have to get back to you on that specific question on the insects for a future conversation.
Okay, people want to know.
Yeah.
That we came up quite a bit last night.
Unless you have something to add on that.
Well, I mean, just the environmental review, based on sort of independent assessment, is that there will be relocation of wildlife and animals and insects, and they will, they will return. I mean, that's.
Well, you and I don't know if they're going to return.
I mean, it's.
No clue.
The ecologists have looked at it and made that assessment.
Okay.
We're trying to support local beekeeping in our community gardens.
Well, the bees are one thing. I'm talking about all the other species that came up last night. They
I
had a
can't
list
save
of.
every mosquito, but I'm gonna try.
I actually feel, what, Aldrin did, then go ahead. Aldrin, go ahead.
You probably discussed this, but is there a modeling for like unintended consequences? I mean, the water has to go somewhere.
Yes.
Would there be a discussion on Roosevelt Island in the future?
Yeah.
Or government, like where is the unintended consequence? Of
Yeah.
Where is this water going to go?
Right, sure. So one of the things that happens with this stuff is that there's kind of the riverine context, and then there's basically the coastal context. In the riverine context, you worry a lot more about if you're modifying your floodplain, like a riverbank, the water is going to be redirected and go in a different place. This isn't that. This is the ocean, right? I mean, the East River is a saltwater estuary of the Atlantic Ocean. So when the water comes in from the ocean, it's not like a wall here is redirecting the ocean, to a different place. So we have modeled basically the hydrology of the East River and all of the surrounding communities, including the places that you mentioned. Today, where is the water going? And then we've modeled it with this project built and in place, and to see whether there's any displacement of water, and there's no incremental effect because it's a drop of water in the ocean, in effect.
The ocean wins.
Yes.
Just really quickly, the borough president brought up sports fields last night, and I guess this is really for you, Alyssa. Someone brought up the idea of not having sort of designated field space use, but having more mixed field space use in the future East River Park. Is that something that you're able to look at and
Yeah,
pursue further?
definitely, and actually, I mean, my comment to myself was to look at the labeling in the PowerPoint, which I think is probably more the issue.
Okay.
Right, so there can be used for both soccer and baseball, and we'll look at those images.
Are you going to be meeting with all of the coaches to see what they want? Maybe you've done that.
We did do that part, and what I think we still need to do is go back to them and say, and here's the field you're gonna be at. But until they put in their application for what they need next year, I mean, that's sort of a ongoing conversation. But yes, the gentleman came up to me afterwards, and we'll be in touch with him.
And we're working with them too, all of them.
I know,
Yeah.
they're also calling.
OLS and Peter Cooper, Stuyvesant, all of them, so we're trying.
Richard, go ahead.
I'm gonna take a risk at asking the other side of the question. With your projection models, why is there no projection on droughts? And the possibility that your new bulkheads will erode and affect other conditions within all this money that you're now putting in this situation. So how is that possibility and that potential mitigated in this situation?
Well, good question. I mean, you
I'll
have,
start. and
no,
you can-
please, it's,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think we didn't mention, but part of the project and one difference between this alternative versus the previous alternative is we're actually rebuilding the bulkhead in East River Park, which is a real advantage for the longevity of East River Park. So that's part of this project. And moreover, irrigation is part of the East River Park, construction plan for watering. And we are, planting drought tolerant and native species, so
Yeah, I
sort of
didn't know the-
multifaceted.
I didn't know the fill
approach.
and I didn't know the ecosystem that you were doing, because it does change and that's a
Yeah,
concern.
thank you for the question.
Back to the fill though, what is the time frame for that? How does it settle? And
Yeah.
does that have some impact on the phasing issue?
Yeah, so some of the details of that are still being worked out. We do need a lot of fill. We don't have any concerns about being able to source it. It will be clean fill, meet all of the regulations. Typically, it takes fill 6 to 9 months to settle in this condition. We're looking at using wick drains, which basically are drains that you plant in the ground before you put the fill down, which remove moisture from underneath the fill, and we expect that will be able to accelerate settlement of the fill. There's compacting that we'll be able to use as well, and then in the construction phasing, you'd be astonished at how many things you can actually still do while fill is settling. For example, and this is something that I've learned from our team recently, we can build the buildings while the fill is settling, because we're basically driving piles down underneath the fill and then building the buildings on top of them, so it's not impacted by whether the fill settles or not. So we have all of this getting incorporated into construction phasing. I will say it is very complex, and fill settlement is something that is one of the more challenging things we have to incorporate into the schedule.
So there was flooding in CB8 and CB11 from Sandy, so what are we doing about that from the East River?
So the Mayor's Office of Resiliency isn't here, so I'm
Okay,
just,
then never mind.
I'm just the construction guy, as I like to say, but, I would just, I know there is a plan, for, there's a resiliency plan for East Harlem, that's been developed or is under development. I think actually Parks may
This
be the
stems from
sponsor
the
of
Big
that.
U
Yeah,
project, just to give you an idea of
Yeah.
geography.
Just don't want to
Yeah.
be left out.
yes,
No, I'm
Yeah.
with you.
yeah.
Can you just briefly mention the amphitheater for anyone who wants to know about that?
Right, okay, so the amphitheater, which is at the sort of foot of Corliss Hook Park, there's a, I don't know if you mind going to the
I don't mind
slide,
at all.
Janie.
Take me a minute.
The Corliss Hook Park Bridge needs to be reconstructed, and anyway, regardless of this project, and so we've, instead of having two different construction projects, we're gonna do both at the same time, which also means that we're reconstructing the amphitheater and bringing the flood protection a little further south than we originally intended under the previous alternative. And as Jamie just mentioned, we're going even further south because we're integrating the Lower East Side Ecology Center as well. And so we've been doing some, this is a newer part of the project and is not as advanced in the design as some of the other parts, the rebuild of the amphitheater. We've done one task force meeting, which the council member helped facilitate getting people in the room. We're gonna do another one on the design input there. We got a lot of feedback. This was an initial sketch from the designers, but it is under development. And we've been asking people, how formal do they want the space? A lot of comments about noise and trying to build something so that the noise isn't reverberating back in the neighborhood as much as possible, as well as the seating, the kind of seating in the amphitheater.
You'll have a lot of noise complaints if you don't do it right. I mean, I'm just saying, a lot. But
I know.
I mean, I'm for it, but just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I just wanna reiterate, you know, in the 1940s, this was like the community dance space. Then it got renovated after 9/11 with Erin Brockovich. That created the, you know, more stabilized seating area. It is very important to the community going way back to have that space to be able to dance and do other things and performances.
Absolutely. All right, any other questions? Yes, Matthew?
Jamie, just have a question about construction phasing. Just because during construction, there will be a few hurricane seasons that come through. And it's sort of a hard thing, but to the degree possible, how are you trying to schedule construction appropriately around hurricane season so there isn't, you know, sort of an opportunity or a time when we need fill to settle right in the heart of hurricane season? I mean, are you able to coordinate it in any
Yes.
sort of way?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, in general, you know, our construction folks there's a series of measures that we adopt to ensure that things are tied down, that they're stabilized, that they're in the right place. With things like fill, you're looking at covering it, which we do, you know, we have fill-related activities at construction sites around the city, and so we have, you know, both sort of statutory, regulatory requirements about how we treat that material in a lot of different ways, and so that's one of them, is making sure we can protect it. Just since you also raised that point, maybe I'll also mention, I mean, there's been a sort of question asked a lot by people about why can't you put an interim protection into place. Actually, the Emergency Management Department is looking at something, HESCO barriers in other places, Red Hook and other parts of the Manhattan shoreline, which are basically very stable semi-permanent sandbags. And we looked at that very hard here. This is, as I said, we have a different condition in different parts of the city. In this location, basically what we would be able to stop in terms of flooding with a temporary improvement is just something that would basically be flooding East River Park. Anything that is substantial enough to bring water into the neighborhood, you can't deal with as a temporary measure. And that's been something that's hard to convey, just because, but we have these different conditions. You know, South Street Seaport, for example, you know, the seaport is right there, and even in a 10-year storm, the seaport can be flooded, whereas we have East River Park, and the elevation changes up into the neighborhood in a different way in this location.
Yes, Richard?
Yeah, one quick question. With the construction in this area and all the fills, how will you not be able to disturb the sediment that is already in the river, which may be toxic? If it is, what's the mitigation plan?
So we actually don't have very much in water construction here. We just have, we're reconstructing the bulkhead, but in most cases that's just straight reconstruction. There's some filling in, and you know, the short answer is it's regulated by the Army Corps, the Coast Guard, DEC, locally by local agencies, and through the EIS we are getting concurrence for our approach to addressing all of those issues. So I don't have all the details, you know, in my head at the moment, but it's certainly in the EIS, all the measures we intend to take, and we will receive approvals from those 3 levels of government on it.
Okay. Yes, quickly?
I just don't understand, are you putting in a flood wall next to the NYCHA building? Did
No.
I miss that?
No,
Because I thought I saw a picture.
That was the previous
Previous,
approach.
okay, good.
This is now the flood
Okay.
wall is
So it's
underneath
confused.
a reconstructed park, so you don't know it's there.
Good, that's what I thought you had said, but then I was confused by the image, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay.
I do just sort of a last note, and sort of echoing Councilmember Powers a little bit, as well as Councilmember Rivera, just that, you know, to this group, I mean, this is people talk about how hard it is to address climate change, and this is the hard work. I mean, it is a long-term problem, increasingly less long-term, but it's a long-term problem where you have to do a lot of painful things in the near term, and if we do all of them, all that will happen is that things won't happen that would otherwise have happened. And this is why addressing climate change is so hard, particularly in an urban context. And it's been a real struggle, but that's the mission here.
How long do you think this particular project will last? In other words, obviously the Robert Moses has lasted in some way. People last night complained, perhaps incorrectly, factually, but do you have some sense of what the projection is?
Well, in general, I mean, parks and new infrastructure that we're building today are going to last, much longer than infrastructure even that we built, decades and decades ago. In terms of providing a level of protection, we're designing this so that it's adaptable, so that we can add to it up to 2 feet structurally, so that it would address our projections of climate change into the end of the century.
Okay.
The reason we're not building it up that much higher today is a couple things. One, it's sort of probably unnecessarily removing a few generations from the water's edge. But also, we just don't know. We don't know what we have projections, but we don't really know what those projections will look like at the end of the century, and we don't know what technologies we'll have available to us in 50 years to be able to adapt this. So it would be, overly conservative to try and address that, that sort of build the park right up to that higher level.
No, yeah, can you take it from over? Yes, no, go ahead.
I just have one question, maybe I missed it in the presentation. It's right around the Con Ed plant. There's a pinch point between pedestrians and cyclists, which consistently has a conflict. How is that going to be rebuilt so that way there's a wider space for both?
Yeah, so we're not in a position where we can rebuild it, so instead what the administration has funded is a flyover bridge. So there's a bridge, the pinch point, so where's the actual pinch point? Is it here?
Where that building is.
Yes.
Here, yeah. So there's a flyover bridge that will start in East River Park and fly over that pinch point for pedestrians, and we have $56 million to be able to build that.
That's what he was talking about earlier.
Yeah, so how wide is that flyover bridge going to be?
I don't know the exact specifications. I believe that our typical pedestrian bridge here is 12 feet wide. Is that?
Yeah, I think for the flyover bridge, which is in very early stages,
Yeah.
so this area has a lot of conflicts and a lot of utilities below ground, not just Con Edison, but also the subway line, the tunnels. So in this area, we're working with DOT, and DOT is really the entity that's going to lead this project to full construction. And right now we're collecting underground information, so soil borings and geotech data to confirm how wide we can actually build the span. But we're trying to build it as wide as possible, but it's likely going to be around 15 foot of clearance, or minimum 12, which is what your typical shared use path would be. But it's all dependent on the results of our data collection.
And the grade of that bridge will also be accessible for people with
Correct, yes.
devices?
That's
Right,
why-
so
that's
those
why
are
it's so
those are
long.
general
Yeah.
goals of the city. So we aim to do universal access in all of our design now. So the spans, the landings, so there'll be one landing kept in J. Brown Walk, and that's going to probably extend a little further into that in order to accommodate the proper grade for it. And there's obviously clearance requirements with the FDR drive, which are also driving the design itself.
And are considerations for increasing number of cyclist projections in New York City, like is that taken into consideration to ensure that the path is going to be wide enough so that way pedestrians and cyclists and increasing use of that area doesn't have any conflict?
And I think generally yes, but again, this is a very constrained area, and I would caveat that will probably be driven by all of the constraints below ground in terms of how wide we can actually make these footings, which is really what drives how wide we can have a bridge in this area. I mean, we would love to make it as wide as possible. I mean, aiming for 20 feet, but we really won't know until we get the results of the geotech data, which is currently underway.
Rosie, you had a question?
Yeah, but I don't understand, it will be wider than what it currently is now.
Oh,
You just
yeah,
don't know
right
how
now
much.
it's 36, less than 36
basically
inches.
3 feet wide.
Yes.
In that area,
That's horrible.
100%.
You could only go one way at a time when you're
Correct,
there.
Yeah.
correct. So we're aiming for shared use paths, so both bike lanes and pedestrian.
You gotta turn to the side and walk through.
With your bikes, yeah, that's.
All right, any other questions? All right,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much. Carlina, do you want to add, you're the last person standing from the city council. Are there other things you want to talk about besides this topic?
We are working on all of these things at the same time with multiple agencies in the room, DEP, DOT, OEM, Parks, DDC, I'm sure Mayor's office. It is a very big project that we have really been working on since 2013, essentially.
And the health department also, because that came up a lot last night. Challenges
Public health
of
concerns,
asthma.
mitigation,
in terms of their
construction,
regulatory role,
all of
yeah.
those things. And I just want to thank all the community boards for all the work that you've done. And a quick note to CB5, thank you for passing a resolution supporting our rental fees bill. If you all have any questions, you could reach out to our office. We're working on this every single day, and I have to thank my staff, and especially Chief of Staff Pedro Carrillo, who's right there. So thank you.
Stephanie Chan got mentioned earlier, but she's been doing a huge amount of work from our office. Okay, any other questions? All right, I'm gonna be very, very quick in terms of what we've been working on. We heard about the coastal resiliency. We had a loopholes, last week hearing, similar number of people showing up and lots of discussion. We have a million parade. We had the LGBT Pride, but we also did the first Pride Ball in Harlem. Very, very, supportive in terms of the people who attended. Disability Pride, Dominican Parade is coming up, the African American Day Parade, and more substantively, we're doing a helicopter task force, which I assume you'll all be notified about in the very near future. We've had the same discussion for many years, but I hope we can come to some more satisfactory conclusions. I know that we have the budget, we have some expense money, a small amount. We're gonna focus a lot of it on the census, so people who apply know that, but you should know that you should make sure that people understand that we've got to find a way to have nonprofit groups. Could be art groups working on census, because we need to have different corners. We have a complete count committee. We're doing the paper challenge. There's money involved, so every community board should try to beat itself on the number of recycling percentage that it has done in the past. I think you know about that. We're suing the mayor at least twice, one on homes and one on 2 bridges, and I think we've updated you on both of those lawsuits. We are testifying today on the NYCHA annual plan hearing, where we have been putting in a great deal of time on all of the NYCHA issues. I believe actually a staff member goes every single day, and I don't know if this is good or bad, because NYCHA is almost killing the tenants with so many meetings, but there is a meeting on the PACT or RAD or other types, or MAP, other kinds of acronyms with these amazingly resilient tenants almost every single day, from the top of the Manhattan to the bottom. I think it's very, very challenging. We're trying to make sure they know what's going on. We are I understand there's a price hike Con Ed hearing coming up on Monday. I don't think many people know about it. I don't know why in the world Con Ed needs more money. They have screwed up the blackout. They lost 2,000 homes in Staten Island the other day. They need to have no more money, in my opinion, but everyone should go to the hearing. I want to thank Shula Warren from our office and Holly Chu, because we now have senior food bags from top of Manhattan to the bottom of Manhattan for $8. Is the most successful program. Hundreds of seniors are signing up. I want to mention something about Directive 10. This is a school issue, so if you have people on the board who are looking at school issues, the controller just a couple of weeks ago, finally, after me bugging him for 10 years, got rid of a directive that says the city of New York with Reso A Capital can only purchase the carts that are in the closet that the poor teacher has to bring out in terms of the laptops. That's how it's been for 100 years, I don't know. Well, how long as there have been computers, you could not buy an individual iPad, you could not buy an individual laptop, and you could not buy an individual Chromebook. So all the charter schools are walking around with all this great hardware, and the public school kids have to go unlock the door, take the card out, take the computers out, give them to the students, put them back in the cart, put them back in the closet, and lock the closet. I've seen it a million times. It made me crazy. And then the little charter school kids walk in with their individual laptops. So it's because of this Directive 10 that said OMB, people who are doing the all of the work on Wall Street in terms of backing up our bonds, bond rater said you can't have any reso dollars that spend for anything that's not networked. And of course, this little cart was networked. Well, it went away. I've been bugging them for 10 years. So now we can buy what I just described. That may seem like a small issue, particularly for the young people who are disabled in District 75. They need those Chromebooks, which is where they learn. So anyway, now, so you should make sure that the schools know this. We're gonna be sending out material. For me, it's a big deal. I wanted to just mention something about the hawkers, which is a mostly downtown issue, but it has gotten to the point in the Battery area that people who sell perhaps illegal tickets to boats that are either free already, don't exist, go to New Jersey, I mean, it's a real scam. They're also putting drugs in the hot dog vendors, wheels. It's a real challenge. It's a real bad situation, not to mention fights. So we are working again with all the agencies to get them to say, we've got to clean up this area. Tourists get scammed, people get hurt, and sometimes somebody might get killed because these are individuals who are not doing the best in terms of commerce. So I just mentioned that as something else. And then I just, one other thing I want to mention is the community boards. I want to thank the city council because I know you got more funding, a small amount. We have to be very careful. I do not want to read that somebody in Manhattan, like in Brooklyn, has bought a car or anything that is like it. So I want to emphasize that work with us if you need to figure out what you can actually purchase. And then the Seaport Community Mural Project, down where you heard earlier about interim flood protection. We're going to be having a design, and it's a competition that people are very much applying. That's what I have. I do want to let you know that our beloved Jim Karras is going to be the general counsel of the city council. He has accepted that position. It's great for him. I'm very happy for him. It's hard on us, I'm going to be honest, but it's a job that he's always wanted. He was there for many years as the number 2 person, and now he's going to be number 1 for the city council. So we're still going to be calling on him, but we're going to miss him here. And he will hopefully take all of the Manhattan issues and make them number 1 compared to those other boroughs. Anyway, thank you very much. I don't know, Rosie, if you have anything else you want to add? No? So we're adjourned? Anybody else?
Can I
Go
just
ahead.
make one
No
small
adjournment.
comment about the resolution on the resiliency?
Yes.
Could you change the shoulds to musts? That's my legal hat, because some of the paragraphs have musts, and a few of them just have shoulds.
Okay, we will go through them and make sure there was no specific reason why we
Like
used a
this
should.
one even should disclose the plans for these different parks,
Yes.
and meeting with the community.
Certainly some of those, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go through them.
Thank you for
Thank you.
bringing that to our attention.
So we're gonna be recessing
Okay.
today's meeting.
Got it.
Till Tuesday.
Until Tuesday, we will be in touch in terms of time, place, specifically time. We will comb through the resolution and make sure any changes to it are made. We will be in touch. Besides emailing, we will make phone calls to all the boards and all the council members to make sure that Tuesday can go smoothly
Right.
as
Do we all
possible.
need to be there? in
No,
terms
just
of
3 and 6.
Oh, that's what I.
Okay.
Okay.
And anybody else who wants to be there
Yeah.
can be there. But
It's
yeah,
a
3
public
and 6
meeting,
and the council
obviously the
members
other boards
need to be
too.
there.
In terms of the vote.
3 and 6,
Right.
and the council
That's
members.
right.
We need
Yes.
4
Thank
council
you.
members and 3 and 6. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So the meeting is recessed.
Not adjourning.